The grand hall of the Shirathi Empire was a place of light and shadow. Crystal pillars reached to the ceiling like frozen beams of starlight. The floor was made of smooth black stone, reflecting the faces of the hundreds gathered there. But at the very center, on the highest step, sat the one they had all come to see. Princess Soraya. She was young, with long silver hair that flowed like liquid moonlight. Her eyes were pale white, clouded and empty. She could not see the nobles before her, nor the crystal throne she sat upon. Her hands rested in her lap, her posture straight but calm. She was born blind, and her legs had been weak since birth. She moved only with the help of her attendants. In a warrior empire like the Shirathi, where strength was honor, her life had been marked by whispers and pity. Today, the emperor, her father, stood beside her, his voice deep and echoing through the chamber. "My daughter must take the bond," he declared. "It is law, it is tradition, and it is the only way she can take the throne when my time ends." Murmurs filled the hall. The bond was sacred, a joining of minds and spirits between two people. It was more than marriage. It allowed the pair to share thoughts, emotions, and sometimes even strength. But no one in the Shirathi court had volunteered for years. Offers had been sent to noble houses and warrior clans. Every answer was the same: refusal. "She cannot lead us," a noble whispered under his breath. "She will be a burden," said another. "She will bring weakness to the throne," murmured a third. Soraya heard them all. Her ears were sharp, and she had learned to catch the words people thought she could not hear. But she showed no reaction. Her face remained calm, even when her heart ached. The emperor turned to the crowd. "Then I open the search to all worlds," he said. Gasps and shocked cries echoed. The proud Shirathi had never allowed an outsider into the royal line. It was unthinkable, a break in their traditions. But the emperor's voice was final. "She will have her bondmate, no matter where they are found." Far back in the hall, among the off-world guests, a human stood quietly, Captain Elias Mar. He was not dressed like the nobles. His dark leather jacket was worn from travel, his boots scuffed. He had come to the Shirathi capital for trade negotiations, not politics. Yet when he heard the emperor's words, his eyes went to the young woman on the throne. She sat alone in a hall full of people, as the crowd shifted and muttered. An old alien merchant at Elias's side leaned closer. "You are looking too long at the blind princess," the merchant said in a low voice. Elias smiled faintly. "Just curious." The merchant's 4 eyes narrowed. "Curiosity can kill, human. If you bond with her, you will have enemies you cannot count. There are those who would rather see her dead than see her on the throne." Elias's gaze stayed on Soraya. Her head was tilted slightly, as if she were listening to every sound in the room. He could see the quiet strength in the way she sat, unshaken under so many judging eyes. "Enemies I cannot count," Elias said softly. "I've had worse." The merchant gave a deep, rattling laugh. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both," Elias replied. The emperor was still speaking, his voice rising. "If there is one among you with the courage to stand beside her, step forward." The hall grew quiet. No one moved. The nobles avoided looking at the throne, afraid the emperor might call on them. Elias took a slow breath. He thought of the countless faces he had met in his travels, the proud, the powerful, the cruel. But this princess, blind and fragile in the eyes of her people, seemed stronger than most. She had survived years of isolation and rejection. That was strength. He respected, and perhaps something more. He stepped forward. His boots echoed on the black stone floor. Heads turned, voices whispered. "A human?" Someone gasped. "What is he doing?" Another hissed. Soraya heard the footsteps and felt the tension in the air change. She turned her head slightly toward the sound. "Who approaches?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying across the hall. "Captain Elias Mar, of Earth," he said, stopping at the foot of the throne steps. "I am here to offer myself as your bondmate." The hall erupted. Nobles shouted. Others laughed. In disbelief, some even sneered, calling it a joke. But Saraya did not smile. Instead, she asked the question that mattered most. Why? Elias met her unseeing eyes. Because I see you, he said. Not your weakness. Not your throne, you. For a moment, the hall fell silent again, and in that silence, Saraya's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Somewhere in the pause-ellipse, shadows of the hall, an unseen figure slipped away through a side door, carrying a message to someone who would not be pleased with the human's decision. Someone who would see Elias as a threat to be removed. The game had begun. Asterisk. The morning after the announcement, the palace was restless. Rumors moved through the halls faster than light. Servants whispered in corners. Guards exchanged glances, and nobles argued in hushed tones. The human's bold move had shaken the entire court. Captain Elias Mar was summoned to the east wing of the palace, the private quarters of the royal family. 2 tall Shirathi guards escorted him down a long corridor lined with tall windows. Beyond the glass, he could see the city sprawling below, its towers glowing under the twin suns. The air was filled with the hum of alien machinery and the distant calls of winged beasts. Elias walked with a steady step, feeling the weight of many watching eyes. They stopped before a set of tall silver doors carved with strange patterns. One guard stepped forward and announced, "Captain Elias Mar, here at the request of Princess Saraya." The doors opened silently, and Elias stepped inside. The chamber was warm, lit not by bright light, but by soft blue lamps that cast gentle shadows. The air smelled faintly of sweet flowers. Near the center of the room, seated on a cushioned bench, was Saraya. Her silver hair fell over her shoulders, and a long robe of deep violet wrapped around her form. She was not wearing her ceremonial crown today. Instead, she looked simpler, almost like any young woman meeting a guest. She turned her head slightly toward the sound of his steps. "Captain Mar," she said, her voice calm but curious. "You came." Elias stopped a few steps away. "I said I would," he replied. A small smile touched her lips. "Most who speak to me make promises they do not keep." Her tone was not bitter, but there was a quiet truth in it. Elias moved closer, and instead of sitting right away, he looked around the room. There were no windows here, only the soft lamps and shelves filled with carved figurines. He realized each piece had a different texture, rough, smooth, curved, for her to feel and see with her hands. "You have many things here," he said. "They help me imagine the world I cannot see," she answered. Her fingers brushed over the shape of a small crystal bird. "I like to imagine its wings." Elias finally sat across from her. "They say the mind sees more than the eyes," he said. She tilted her head, considering his words. "They also say the mind can be cruel," she replied softly. "I hear the whispers. I know what they call me, weak, broken, unfit." Elias's voice was firm. "I don't." Her blind eyes seemed to search his face. "Then what do you see?" "A woman sitting in front of me who has lived with more courage than most warriors I've met," he said, without hesitation. For a moment, there was silence. Then Saraya asked, "Why are you here, Captain Mar? Truly?" Elias leaned forward slightly. "Because I believe your people are wrong about you, and because I think I would like to know you." She did not answer right away. Instead, she gestured toward a tray of small cups beside her. "Will you share tea with me?" Elias nodded, and she poured with steady hands despite her blindness. The tea was warm and carried a faint spice. They drank quietly for a moment, letting the silence settle not as an awkward gap, but as something calm. Saraya broke it first. "Bonding is not just a title," she said. "It is a link between minds and souls. It cannot be forced, it must be earned." Her voice carried a note of warning, as if testing his resolve. "I know," Elias said, "and I am ready to earn it." Outside the chamber, 2 shadowy figures stood just beyond the door. Listening, one was a tall alien noble in dark robes, his expression sharp and cold. The other was a shorter, broad-shouldered alien with scars down his jaw, a mercenary by the look of him. She is trusting him too quickly, the noble whispered. The mercenary's eyes narrowed. Then we make sure he fails the trials. Back inside, Soraya spoke again. The first test will be tomorrow, she said. The crystal labyrinth. Elias raised an eyebrow. Labyrinth? A maze that changes its paths with every step. It listens to the mind. If your will is weak, you will never find the way out. Sounds like fun, Elias said with a small grin. Soraya tilted her head at his tone. You think this is a game? No, he replied, but I've learned not to fear challenges. Fear makes you lose before you even start. For the first time, Soraya laughed, softly but real. You speak as if you have walked many dangerous paths. I have, Elias said simply, and I've survived them all. Their conversation lasted longer than either expected. They spoke of Earth, of the cities under alien skies, of music, and of the strange foods Elias had tasted in his travels. Soraya, in turn, told him stories she had heard from travelers who came to her father's court. Tales she painted in words so vivid that Elias could almost see them. When the meeting finally ended, a guard stepped in to escort Elias away. As he reached the door, Soraya spoke again, her voice quieter now. Captain Mar, he paused. Yes? I do not know yet if you will be my bondmate, she said. But I hope you will. Elias left the room with a faint smile. But as he stepped into the hallway, he caught sight of two figures disappearing around the corner. The look in their eyes before they turned away told him everything. Someone was already planning to stop him, and they would not play fair. ****. The next morning, the palace buzzed with activity. The first of the sacred trials was about to begin. Elias had slept little, not from fear, but from thinking about the conversation with Soraya. He knew this was not just a test of skill, it was a test of trust. And trust, he suspected, was something Soraya had not given easily to anyone. The crystal labyrinth stood in the heart of the palace gardens. From the outside, it looked like a shimmering wall of crystal towers, their surfaces reflecting the twin suns. Inside, the maze was alive. Paths shifted, walls moved, and strange whispers echoed through the air. Legend said the labyrinth could sense your doubts and fears, twisting itself to trap the unworthy. Soraya arrived with two attendants, her violet robes trailing along the path. She carried no weapon, only a small carved staff that helped her walk. When she reached Elias, she smiled faintly. Are you ready, Captain Mar? As ready as I'll ever be, he replied. She tilted her head. This trial, it is meant to be walked together. If one fails, both fail. Before they could step inside, the Emperor himself appeared on the balcony above the garden. Let the first trial begin, his voice boomed. The gates of the labyrinth slid open. With a deep hum, and Elias and Soraya stepped into the glowing maze. At first, the paths seemed simple, wide corridors lined with smooth crystal walls. But within minutes, the ground shifted under their feet. The walls rippled, and the path behind them closed like a mouth swallowing air. A soft voice whispered from nowhere. Turn back. You do not belong here. Elias ignored it, but he felt Soraya's grip on his arm tighten. They are illusions, she murmured. They want to break our focus. The maze turned and twisted in ways that made no sense. Once, Elias swore they had walked in a circle. But when he looked back, the path was gone, replaced by a wall of light. He realized then that the labyrinth wasn't just about finding the way. It was about keeping your mind steady. At one point, they reached a fork in the path. One side glowed with warm golden light, the other with cold blue. Soraya tilted her head, listening. The left path hums, she said. Hums? Elias asked. Yes. It vibrates differently, she explained. Elias trusted her, and they turned left. Moments later, the golden light faded into a clear path forward. They began to move more like a team. Soraya used her sharp hearing to detect changes in the walls. Elias used his sight and instincts to watch for traps. Twice, a sudden drop opened in front of them, but he pulled her back in time after what felt like hours. They reached a large chamber in the center of the maze. In the middle stood a tall crystal pedestal holding 2 silver bands, bonding tokens for those who completed the trial. But as they stepped forward, the floor shuddered, and a jagged crystal beast formed from the walls themselves. It had no eyes, only a mouth filled with sharp, glass-like teeth. Soraya froze. They did not say there would be guardians, she whispered. Maybe they didn't plan for one, Elias said, his eyes narrowing. More likely, he thought, someone had arranged for this extra danger, the beast. Lunged, Elias pushed Soraya aside and rolled to the left. Drawing his sidearm, the weapon hummed, but each shot bounced harmlessly off the crystal hide. It's too strong, Elias shouted. Soraya's voice came quickly. Sound, it must feel sound through the ground. Elias understood instantly. Then we make it hear something else, he said. He stamped his boots hard on the floor, creating heavy vibrations. The beast turned toward him, its massive head lowering. Now! Elias yelled. Soraya struck the ground with her staff in a rapid pattern. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. The vibrations confused the beast, making it hesitate just long enough for Elias to aim at a thin joint in its leg and fire. The shot shattered the joint, and the beast collapsed into shards of crystal that melted back into the walls. Breathing hard, Elias helped Soraya to her feet. That was clever, he said. You listened, she replied, a hint of pride in her voice. They stepped forward and took the silver bands from the pedestal. The labyrinth's walls shifted again, forming a straight path out. When they emerged, the emperor watched them with unreadable eyes. The crowd murmured, some impressed, others clearly displeased. Among the nobles, the dark-robed figure from the day before turned and left without a word. Later, in the quiet of the palace gardens, Soraya spoke softly. You trust me more than most people I have known, she said. Trust is a two-way street. Elias replied, if I didn't believe in you, I wouldn't be here. Soraya's fingers brushed over the silver band on her wrist. This was only the first trial, she said. The next will be harder. Elias smiled faintly. Good, he said. Hard means worth doing. Far away, in a shadowed room of the palace, the noble in dark robes poured a glass of glowing liquid. The first trial was not enough, he said to the scarred mercenary beside him. The next one will break them. 2 days after the labyrinth trial, the palace was alive with celebration. The success of the human and the blind princess had become the talk of the city. Merchants sold crystal trinkets shaped like the silver bands they had won. Street performers acted out scenes of their victory, though in the plays, Elias was always taller and Soraya always more helpless than in truth. Inside the palace, preparations were underway for a formal gathering in the Hall of Stars. It was meant to honor the pair before the next trial began. Soraya sat in her private chambers while attendants arranged her silver hair and adjusted her ceremonial robe of deep violet and gold. She looked calm, but inside her chest there was a quiet storm. This was the first public event where she would stand beside Elias as a potential bondmate. She knew some would see it as a sign of hope, others as an insult to tradition. Elias entered the chamber, dressed in a dark Shirathi tunic that had been tailored for him. You look like someone they should be afraid to underestimate, he said with a half smile. Soraya's lips curved faintly. And you look like someone who doesn't belong here. Story of my life, Elias replied, offering his arm. Shall we? The Hall of Stars was breathtaking. Its high ceiling was a dome of living crystal that reflected the light of the twin suns. Hundreds of guests filled the space. Nobles in shimmering robes, military leaders in polished armor, and off-world dignitaries in exotic garb. Music drifted through the air, soft but full of tension, like a storm waiting to break. The emperor stood at the far end, ready to speak, but before he could begin, a sharp sound cracked through the hall. It was not music, it was the hum of a charged plasma weapon. Elias moved before he thought, stepping in front of Soraya just as a bolt of blue energy shot across the room. The blast hit his shoulder, burning through the fabric and sending a wave of pain down his arm. He gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. Panic swept the hall. Guards shouted. Guests scattered. And the Emperor roared for order. Elias scanned the crowd, his eyes locking on a figure in dark armor slipping toward a side exit. "Stay with the guards," he told Soraya, then charged after the attacker. The assassin moved fast, weaving through servants and overturned tables. Elias pushed through, ignoring the burn in his shoulder. The chase led into a narrow corridor behind the hall, lit only by strips of pale light along the floor. The attacker glanced back once, their helmet reflecting the glow, and Elias saw a mark carved into the armor, a sigil he had noticed before. On the robe of the dark noble who had been watching them since the first day, the assassin turned a corner, but when Elias followed, the corridor was empty. He cursed under his breath, knowing they had used a hidden door by the time he returned. To the hall, the guards had secured Soraya in a protective circle. Her expression was calm, but her hands were tight around her staff. "You're hurt," she said the moment she heard his steps. "It's nothing," Elias lied. She reached out and her fingers brushed the burned fabric. "It is not nothing," she said softly. "You put yourself in front of me without thinking. That's what you do for someone you're fighting for," Elias replied, meeting her blind gaze. The Emperor approached, his expression hard. "This was no random attack," he said. "The weapon was military grade. Only nobles and high-ranking officers have access." Elias didn't need to say the name out loud, but both he and the Emperor were thinking it. There was someone in the court who wanted Soraya dead before the bond could be completed. That night, after the hall was emptied and the guests sent home, Elias stood alone on the palace balcony. The city stretched below, lights flickering like stars. He heard the door behind him open, and Soraya's soft steps approached. "I told the healers to leave your wound alone," she said. "You can't fight with your arm wrapped in 3 layers of bandages." Elias gave a faint smile. "You sound like you expect me to keep fighting." "I do," she replied simply. "Because if you stop, they win." Her words carried a quiet weight. For a moment, neither spoke, the cool night air swirling around them. Finally, Elias said, "They're not going to stop next time. They won't just aim for me." "Then we will be ready," Soraya said, her voice steady. "You and I, together." Far across the city, in a shadowed chamber lit by a single blue lamp, the noble, in dark robes, sat with the scarred mercenary. The shot should have ended it. The mercenary growled. "It was only the first warning," the noble replied, his voice calm. "The real test comes next, and they will not survive it." The palace had grown quieter since the attack, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Guards stood at every doorway, and every guest was watched. Yet Elias could feel it. The danger had not passed. It was only waiting. Soraya had returned to her private chambers. Her attendants instructed not to leave her alone. But even surrounded by guards, she felt uneasy. There was something about the attack that lingered in her mind. Not just the danger, but the certainty that it had been meant for her. Late one evening, she walked the quiet corridor toward the garden balcony. She liked to stand there, feeling the wind and listening to the distant hum of the city. Her guards stayed a respectful distance behind. As she approached, she heard voices from an open doorway nearby. She stopped, her sharp hearing catching every word. The prophecy was clear. One voice said, deep and cold, "If the blind one bonds with an outsider, the empire will fall within a generation." Another voice replied, low and urgent, "Then why has the emperor allowed it?" "He believes love will save the throne," the first voice scoffed. "Foolish hope. It will destroy us all." Soraya's hands tightened around her staff. A prophecy. Was that why they had always kept her apart? Was that why every noble had refused her? The voices grew fainter as the men walked away. But the words stayed, echoing in her mind. If the blind one bonds with an outsider, the empire will fall. She didn't move until she felt Elias's presence. He had been searching for her, and when he reached her side, he saw the tension in her face. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then said, "I overheard. Something, a prophecy. They believe I will bring ruin if I bond with you." Elias studied her expression. "And do you believe it?" Her voice was soft but unsteady. "I don't know. I have been told my whole life that I am not strong enough, that I am a danger to the throne. Now I wonder if... Maybe they're right." Elias stepped closer, his tone firm. "Saraya, do you remember the labyrinth?" "Yes. You found the right path when I couldn't. You heard what I couldn't hear. We survived because we worked together. That is not ruin. That's strength." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "But what if the prophecy is true? What if our bond brings war? What if it costs lives?" Elias didn't flinch. "Then we face it together. Prophecies don't control the future. Choices do." For a moment, she just stood there, letting his words sink in. Part of her wanted to believe him, to trust that the future was theirs to shape, but in the shadows behind them, doubt lingered like a cold wind. The next day, the palace was busy preparing for the second trial. This one was called the Circle of Blades. It was less about navigation and more about combat. The bondmates had to defend each other against multiple skilled opponents. It was meant to test their ability to work as one under pressure. Before the trial began, the Emperor summoned Elias to his private council chamber. The room was lit by a single beam of sunlight from above. The Emperor's face was grave. "I have heard whispers," he said, "that some in the court believe your bond with my daughter will bring disaster." Elias met his gaze. "And do you believe that?" The Emperor was silent for a long moment. "I believe my daughter has been alone for too long. If she chooses you, it will be because she sees something in you the others do not." Elias nodded. "Then I'll make sure she never regrets it." That night, Saraya lay in her chamber. Unable to sleep, her mind kept returning to the prophecy. Images of war, burning cities, and betrayal spun through her thoughts. But then she remembered Elias standing in front of her during the attack, taking the blast without hesitation. She remembered his voice in the labyrinth, telling her to trust herself. Perhaps the prophecy was wrong. Perhaps she could change it. Far away, in the noble's private quarters, the dark-robed figure sat with the scarred mercenary. "The second trial will be tomorrow," the noble said. "And this time, they will not leave unscathed." The mercenary smirked. "I'll make sure of it." In another part of the palace, Elias stood on the balcony outside his quarters. The twin moons hung in the sky, casting silver light over the gardens. He could feel the storm coming. But he also knew one thing: no prophecy, no noble, no assassin was going to keep him from standing beside Saraya. The Hall of Ancients had not been opened in over a century. Its great doors were carved from the bones of a star leviathan, said to protect the royal family. Today, those doors stood wide, and the air inside was thick with the scent of incense and the weight of tradition. Rows of nobles, warriors, and off-world dignitaries lined the sides of the hall. Above them, banners of the Shirathi Empire hung like silent witnesses. At the far end, beneath a crystal arch, stood the bonding altar, a smooth black stone table carved with glowing runes. Here, the life bond between two souls would be sealed. If Elias and Saraya completed this final step, their minds would be linked forever. Saraya entered first, guided by two attendants. Her gown was silver threaded with gold, the long sleeves moving like liquid with every step. The crowd bowed their heads, though many eyes were cold. She could hear the whispers, some bitter, some fearful, some curious, but she kept walking, her steps steady. Elias followed moments later, dressed in the dark ceremonial armor of the bondmate. It wasn't made for battle, it was more symbolic, with inlaid silver lines that glowed faintly in the candlelight. He walked to the altar and stood beside her. They didn't speak, but she could feel his presence. Steady and unshaken, the high priest stepped forward, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Today we witness the union of mind and spirit. Two paths joining into one. The bond cannot be broken except by death. The ritual began. They each placed a hand on the black stone. The runes flared to life, glowing brighter as the priest chanted the ancient words. Elias could feel the air grow heavier. Like the moment before a lightning strike. A strange hum vibrated in his bones. The bond was forming. But then, Soraya's head tilted slightly. She felt something. Faint vibrations in the stone beneath her hand. It wasn't part of the ritual. It was too irregular, too sharp. Her hearing caught it before anyone else could notice. Without warning, she spoke in a sharp voice. Elias left. He moved instantly, grabbing her arm and pulling her down just as a plasma bolt screamed through the air. It hit the altar, sending shards of black stone into the crowd. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed forward, people screamed, and the high priest stumbled back. Shielding his face from the upper balcony, an assassin in dark armor raised their weapon again. Elias rolled across the altar, pulling his sidearm. The crowd scattered as another blast scorched the floor where he'd been standing. Soraya's voice cut through the noise. 3 steps right, 2 up. The sound is closer there. She was tracking the assassin by sound alone. Elias trusted her completely. He moved as she guided, ducking under a fallen banner and circling toward the balcony stairs. The assassin fired again, the shot grazing his armor, but he didn't stop. Reaching the stairs, he charged upward. The assassin turned to flee. But Elias tackled them, the two crashing against the railing. The weapon clattered to the floor below. They struggled, the assassin striking with a hidden blade. Elias caught the wrist and twisted hard. With a sharp cry, the attacker dropped the blade. A group of guards reached them, pulling the assassin away. The helmet was torn off, revealing the scarred mercenary, the same one who had been whispering with the dark noble for days. The emperor's voice thundered through the hall. Enough! This ceremony will not be stopped by cowards. The guards dragged the mercenary away. Elias returned to Soraya, who was still standing near the shattered altar. Her head high despite the chaos. The high priest hesitated. The altar is damaged. The ritual cannot be completed here. Soraya's voice was firm. Then we complete it here anyway. The bond is not in the stone, it is in us. Elias stepped beside her again. They each took the other's hand. The high priest, after a long pause, began to speak the final words. As the last phrase left his lips, a wave of light surrounded them both. The runes on the broken altar flared one last time before going dark. The bond had been sealed. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. The light of their bond was brighter than any in living memory. Some nobles looked uneasy, others awed. The emperor stepped forward, his voice carrying over the hall. Let all here know, my daughter and her bondmate stand together. No blade, no lie. No prophecy will change that. Soraya turned to Elias, her unseeing eyes soft but sure. They will not stop, she said quietly. Elias's grip on her hand tightened. Then neither will we. Far above in the shadowed gallery, the dark noble watched with narrowed eyes. The bond had formed, brighter and stronger than he expected. But instead of fear, he felt something colder. This will end, he murmured to himself. No matter the cost. Asterisk. The palace did not sleep after the ceremony. The light of Elias and Soraya's bond still echoed in every hallway. Some spoke of it with awe, calling it a sign of strength. Others whispered in fear, saying it was the beginning of the empire's downfall. But for Elias and Soraya, there was no time to celebrate. The emperor called them to the war council chamber. A long table filled with military leaders and high nobles stretched before them. On the far end, the dark noble stood with his hands clasped, his face a mask of control. We have proof. One general began, that the attack in the Hall of Ancients was ordered from inside the court. His eyes flicked toward the dark noble, but the man only smiled faintly. Accusations without evidence are dangerous, the noble said smoothly, and dangerous talk can divide the empire. Elias stepped forward, his voice calm but sharp. The assassin was your man. The scarred mercenary has worked for you for years. Murmurs filled the room. The noble tilted his head. And yet, he is not here to defend himself. Convenient. The emperor slammed his hand on the table. Enough. This ends here. From this day forward, Soraya and Elias will be under my direct protection. Anyone who moves against them moves against the throne. The council was dismissed, but Elias knew this was far from over. Power did not vanish because the emperor made a speech. Those who hated their bond would not stop plotting. That night, the attack came. It began with a blackout. Every light in the west wing of the palace went out. Shadows poured through the corridors, cloaked figures moving with silent precision. Their target was Soraya. They had learned she could sense vibrations, so they moved lightly. But Soraya was already awake, sitting at the edge of her bed, her head tilted. She heard them before they reached her door. "Elias," she whispered, and he was already moving. He grabbed his weapon, stepping into the hallway just as the first attacker rounded the corner. The blast from his pistol lit the dark, sending the figure crashing back. More came, their weapons raised. Elias fired, ducked behind a column, and pulled Soraya into the hall. "Stay close," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied. They moved together, Soraya's hand gripping his arm. She gave quiet, precise directions. 2 ahead. 1 to the left. Another coming from behind. Her voice was calm, her senses sharper than any guard's eyes. They reached the grand stairs, but the dark noble himself stood at the top, flanked by armored soldiers. His voice carried down to them, cold and certain. "This ends tonight. The bond dies here." Elias stepped forward. "You're afraid, not of the prophecy, of change, of a future where you aren't in control." The noble's expression hardened. "Control is what keeps the empire alive," he said. "Without it we fall." The soldiers advanced. Elias fought with everything he had. Plasma blasts lit the hall. Steel clashed, boots echoed on stone. Soraya stayed close, using her staff to strike when attackers came too near. She moved with surprising speed, guided by the smallest sounds. One soldier nearly reached her, but Elias stepped in, taking the hit to his armor before dropping the attacker with a single shot. Pain radiated through his ribs, but he kept moving. This fight wasn't just survival. It was the moment that would decide their future. The tide shifted when palace guards finally arrived. The dark noble realized he had lost the element of surprise. He stepped back toward the shadows. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low. Elias took a step forward. "No, it's just the beginning." The noble vanished into the darkness, leaving his fallen soldiers behind by dawn. The palace was secure again. The emperor ordered a full investigation. He stripped the dark noble of his titles and sent him into exile. The court was shaken. No one could ignore that Elias and Soraya had survived 2 assassination attempts and stood stronger than before. That afternoon, the emperor called the people of the city to the grand balcony. Soraya stood beside Elias, her voice carrying over the crowd. "For too long, I have been told my weakness defines me. I was told I could not lead. I was told I could not protect my people. But today, I tell you this. Strength is not in the body. It is in the heart. It is in the bonds we choose." The crowd roared in approval. Elias glanced at her, pride in his eyes. She had once feared her voice would never matter. Now it was shaping the future of an empire. That night, as the city celebrated, they stood together on the highest tower. The twin moons shone above, their light wrapping the balcony in silver. "Do you think they'll ever accept me?" Elias asked quietly. Soraya smiled. "They will, because they already accept us." Elias looked at her, the woman everyone else had feared to stand beside. The woman who had taught him that courage was more than facing danger, it was facing it together, and he knew then that no prophecy could ever undo what they had built. Far beyond the city walls, in the darkness of the outer provinces, the exiled noble watched the stars. His eyes narrowed. The story was not over, but for now. In the heart of the Shirathi Empire, the blind princes and the human stood united, a bond unbroken and a future unwritten. Asterisk.